So now you're ready to start a drawing. Let's do a little setup to prepare for that. First of all, if you have a template like from a Stagecraft Vectorworks lab, feel free to use it. You can just delete the designer's drawing or whatever else is drawn in it already, and then probably your page size might be wrong and you'd want to do the page setup thing for yourself, but everything else might be ready to go because you'll have a couple of classes at least, like a frame plan class and a cover plan class that will probably work well, for instance, for your final project. So use it if you want to and just adjust it to taste. But here's how to start fresh if you need to do that. So over in Navigation Palette, I'm going to do a couple of things. First, in classes, we can look at our existing default classes Vectorworks gives us. The none class is what you'll default to having active when you open a new file. That's fine. Let's edit the dimensions class. So this is automatically going to be what all of the dimensions you insert go into. It's one of a few tools in Vectorworks that will automatically assign the correct class, so that's nice. So let's right click and say edit. And from the edit window, everything's fine here except check off use at creation. And then I'm not sure this truly matters because we already specified in our dimension standard, but say text style, check off use at creation and say dimensions 10 point. Just to be sure and say okay. So now that's set up. And then we probably want to add some more classes to streamline all of our line attributes so that we don't have to do it for every single shape that we draw. So I'm going to say I could click that little arrow up there, or I could right click and say new just from the main field of the list. And let's make a frame plan class. So check off edit properties after creation and say okay. And here we are. We always want to use at creation because that's what makes it automatic, right? In terms of fill, well, I have mixed feelings about this. I think I typically default to solid, and if it becomes a problem, then I'll turn the fill off. But I like to fill in the shapes usually. It makes them a little easier to see and it looks nicer while you're making it, for one thing. Pen style should be solid, yes. Color should be black. Thickness should be way more than that. Let's go to, I'm in mils, not millimeters, right? So I think that Vectorworks defaults to millimeters. So if you want, I'll go back to that. And a good starting point would be at like 0.25 for the frame. So that's my thicker construction line thickness, right? And everything else is fine here, say okay. And there's my frame class showing up. I could do another one, right click, new, and call this cover. You could also, by the way, just say like thick and thin might be the names of your classes, right? If you just want to have a thinner line and a thicker line that are available to you, all classed out. Anyway, I'm going to check off use at creation again for my cover class. Here I'm going to say none for the fill. And instead of a solid pen, you know I like to do a dash, so I'll select line type. And that dash ought to be okay. But maybe, actually, you know what, that's kind of like the dash that I usually use for a hidden line. So I might pick something new. Maybe the short dash. Let's try that. And thickness, well, 0.05 is a little thin still. So I'm going to go with like 0.18, just a little bit thinner than my frame plan. Everything else is fine, say okay. There's my other class, so I can keep doing that all day until I have enough classes to satisfy my organizational needs. And then let's go to Layers tab also. So in the Design Layers tab, you have just Design Layer 1, that's the default. I could rename it if I wanted to by right-clicking and editing it, and I could rename it there, but I usually don't bother. The one thing I'm going to add here is say new, just like in classes, because I'm going to show you how to import a PDF file of, say, a designer's drawing or the ground plan of the theater you're working in. I'm going to make a PDF layer, I will call it, and I'll edit properties. And here, the thing that's important is to make the scale of your PDF layer the same as the scale of your design layer that you're going to work in. Otherwise, the PDF layer will not show up. You can only have layers visible that are of the same scale as each other. So I know that the PDF I'm going to import, because I looked at its title block, I know that its scale is 1/2 inch scale. So this is 1/4 inch 1:48. So I'm going to click scale here and find 1/2 inch and say OK. That's better. And I want the stacking order to be 2, so that means it will be layered underneath my design layer, which is sometimes important. And I'll say OK, and there's my PDF layer. And now I'm also going to edit the scale of my design layer. So by default it's 1/4 inch scale. I want to change that so that I'm, again, drawing in 1/2 inch scale. More of a typical theatrical drafting scale. Everything else is fine. Say OK. All right. So now I'm ready to import a PDF file if I wish. Here's how we can do that. First of all, I'll activate the PDF layer so that I'm putting my PDF file import on the correct layer. Double click to check it off. I could also go up here and click the layers menu and find it like so. Either way works. And now, 2 ways to import a PDF file. I can either drag it and drop it, just open the window that it's in and drop it in there, or I can click File and Import and PDF. Find it here. I'm going to use the Witch's Castle from The Wizard of Oz. Select that file and you get the Import PDF window. Here's one important thing to check off here. Make sure Snap to Geometry is checked off. The Vectorworks default will have it unchecked. My machine at this point defaults to Snap to Geometry. This will give you snappable points. It will actually create Vectorworks lines out of the PDF file, which is really useful. Otherwise, the PDF is just sort of a dumb image that's in your background, and it's still useful to draw on top of, but having the ability to snap your cursor to that drawing really helps. So do that and say import. There it is. So now, just to be sure I did that correctly and I'm in the right scale, I'll grab my tape measure tool and find a spot that has a dimension, and I'll just click and roughly try to snap and read that my cursor reads really close, 3/100 of an inch shorter than the dimension reads. So that's really good. I've done it successfully. Now, some common issues that come up when you do this, especially if you're trying to make working drawings from a designer's drawing like this. What if there's a bunch of stuff you don't need? So in this case, I told Tala that she didn't have to worry about this round thing in the Witch's Castle. And then there's a bunch of other stuff like dimensions and notes, this little person over here, all sorts of things that aren't needed to do a working drawing of just this one flat in this castle. So how do I get rid of those? 2 ways. The simple way is to go back to my selection tool here. If I double click on the PDF, I get into this editing the crop window. So whenever you're like editing something within an object, you get this yellow boundary around the page, and you have an exit button, which may or may not be hiding behind a palette over in the top right corner. In order to create a crop, I can just pick any shape. I can do the rectangle tool if it's really simple. If I'm really lucky, I can just do that. And that becomes, see how it becomes, it's no longer grayed out. So that becomes a window that I can see through. So if I were to exit now, that's all I've got now, right? So that's really useful. But maybe it didn't do it well enough for my taste. So I can go back into that edit window, double click. Maybe instead of a shape like a rectangle, I can do really precise stuff with maybe the 2D polygon tool. So if I select that, and I'll zoom in some so I can see what I'm doing. Get rid of that attributes palette for now. So now I can get really close to my subject, and I'll just try to make a line that skirts around all the stuff that I don't need. Snapping to some things I don't want to snap to here, that's okay. So I'm trying to eliminate everything that I don't need. Oops. Doesn't have to be a pretty shape, just has to get around all the stuff you want to get around, and it'll disappear, kind of be invisible once you're done. There we go. So I closed my shape, so now I've got it. Let's see what that looks like. Yeah, that's pretty good. So the only things that are wrong here now are, like, I've got this, this was a section cutting plane line. I've got a portion of it that I can't get rid of using this method. And there's some other stuff, like the hidden lines showing the stud walls and platforms behind. Those I don't really need. They might get kind of annoying to have in existence behind my frame plan or my cover plan, maybe. So here's another way you can do this. This will work for maybe the majority of situations. But if you need to get a little more intense, or if you just want it to look the best it can look, here's another way. I'm gonna just undo my way out of everything I just did. Oops, too far. Let's get that PDF back. There it is. Okay, so I've just imported my PDF, and I've checked off that snapping option in the import window still. And here's my PDF file. Here's what I can do instead. I can just click to select it, and once you've done that snapping option in your PDF import, this becomes possible. It is actually a group. This, when you click on it in Object Info, it says it's a PDF page. It's actually behaving as a group. So I can ungroup all of the objects that make up this PDF and manipulate them individually. So in order to do that, from a menu, I would go to Modify and say Ungroup. But the keyboard shortcuts are useful to remember. It's just Control or Command U to ungroup. And it'll ask me if I really want to do this stuff. I say yes. And now you see in Object Info it's telling me there are 3 objects it has unpacked from this group. Most of them I don't need. I'm going to just click on whatever comes first and drag it off to the side. That's the bitmap object. That can be useful for a moment anyway, because the bitmap will have the text of the dimensions and the notes on it, and you won't get that necessarily in what lies underneath here. Then you have just a blank rectangle. It's always there, just delete it. And then you have this. And if I ungroup this, it doesn't look like much right now. If I ungroup this, I get all these. Oh, they disappeared. Oh no, that's okay. Because there's a bunch of other rectangles. It's really weird, guys. Like, you have to move a bunch of stuff out of the way. If it looks invisible, just click the thing that's on top, delete it. Click the thing that's on top, delete it, until you get to something like this, right? So what I can do now is go in here and just select everything I don't need. I don't need any of that, delete it. I don't think I need any of this, delete it. I don't need this guy over here or that dimension, delete it. Delete. I'm gonna say the side view isn't necessary for me to use to draw on top of. I'll delete that too. Delete this. alternately, I could just try to select that. Maybe along with, what do I want? I want that because that's like a cutout inside the cover, so that's important to keep. And then this separate piece up here that we need to draw as its own individual flat, we need that too. So I'll select those, and I can just drag them off to the side. And maybe that's enough for me. I'll close attributes here. And then I can delete all the rest, or maybe I decide I do want to keep some of those stud walls for reference. Maybe that's important so I know like how I'm going to attach my flat to those stud walls. So I'll perhaps just delete everything around it. You get the picture. It can take a little while to get it cleaned up, but once you do, it works really nicely. Delete that ground line there. That one. Some other weird stuff here. That must be a wheel. Edge of a caster. Don't know what that is. Delete it. And let's see if I can grab that. Yep. Don't need to know it's brick. There. So maybe something like that, right? One way or another, arrive at what you like, and then, I think that's an extra line. Yep. And then the only thing that's missing is line weights. So it'll just assign everything to the line weight of the class that you inserted it in. That's fine, but if you like, if you want to, if you need to, just change that line weight or change the class of the object. And then you've got a nice line that you can snap to and use within your drawing. Now the other thing I could do at this point is, first of all, I'm just going to assume that I want to just grab this shape separately. So I'm going to drag it over, put it over here somewhere. There, it's a nice clean outline, right? I know I'm going to want this too. I'll drag it over here, put it somewhere. Done. Okay, so now, let's say I need to set myself up to be able to do both a frame plan and a cover plan for this flat. Pretty common issue. I could use duplicate and move to do that really quickly. First I'm gonna just select everything that I know that I want. I think it's just these three things. And I'm gonna drag them over somewhere else so I can delete all this other stuff. Okay. So now I have all these things. I know that this is a separate piece that I need to draw separately, so I'll just drag that out of the way. And I'm going to try to arrange these on the page sort of roughly the way I think I might want them when I get ready to print. Again, so I'm just saving myself a little bit of time laying out my viewports on the sheet layer. Something like that. And now I can just select. Maybe I even Control G to group those together so they're one thing. And then I can just Control D duplicate or Command D on a Mac. And then Control or Command M, move it over, I don't know, I'm guessing 20 feet in scale. Yeah. There you go. So now I have two incarnations of this shape, and I can make the frame plan on top of one of these, and I can draw my cover seams on top of the other one. And since we're working with irregular shapes now in this final project, keep in mind, like, maybe it's a starting point for you to go into your cover class and draw a bunch of 4 foot by 8 foot rectangles. Maybe. And just, arrange those, keep copying or duplicating them until you have a grid. Like that. Maybe you do that for starters, but then like all this extra rectangle on the outside of your designer's drawing is just in the way and ugly. So instead, by the end of it, just grab the line tool and just trace that over your cover seams, snap to them, and snap to the outside of the designer's drawing, right? And then just delete these rectangles because you don't need them, and then it looks a lot cleaner, and all we need to know really is where the seams are, right? And that's enough for the carpenters to lay it out and cut it precisely. So there you go, that's a good starting point for you to do your project.